This is Trois Corbies by Charles de Lint. 1. Gerta couldn't sleep again. She stood by the upright piano, wedding picture in hand, marveling at how impossibly young she and Jan had been. Why, they were little more than children. Imagine making so serious a commitment at such an age, raising a family and all. Her insomnia had become a regular visitor over the past few years, often her only one. The older she got, the less sleep she seemed to need. She went to bed late, got up early. The only weariness she carried through her waking hours was in her heart. A loneliness that was stronger some nights than others. But on those nights, the old four-poster double bed felt too big for her. All that extra room spread over the map of the quilt, like unknown territories, encroaching on her ability to relax, even when the cats lolling across the hills and vales of the bed's expanse. It hadn't always been that way. When Jan was still alive, before the children were born and after they'd moved out to accept the responsibility of their own lives, she and Jan could spend the whole day in bed, passing the time with long conversations and silly little jokes, sharing tea and biscuits while they read the paper, making slow and sweet love. She sighed, but Jan was long gone. She was an old woman with only her cats and piano to keep her company now. This late at night, the piano could offer her no comfort. Wouldn't be fair to her neighbors. The building was like her, old and worn. The sound of the piano could carry no matter how softly she played. But the cats... One of them was twining in and out against her legs now. Swart Meg, the youngest of the three. She was just a year old, black as the night sky, as gangly and unruly as a pumpkin vine. Unlike the other two, she still craved regular attention and love, to be carried around in Gerta's arms. But even the simplest of tasks difficult to attend to, there was nothing in Gerta's life that required haste any more. Replacing the wedding picture on top of the piano, she picked Swart Meg up and moved over to the window that provided her with a view of the small cobblestone square outside. By day there was always someone to watch, mothers and nannies with their children, sitting on the bench and chatting with each other while their charges slept in prams. Old men smoking cigarettes, pouring coffee for each other out of a thermos, playing checkers and dominoes. Neighborhood gossips standing by the river wall, exaggerating their news to give it the desired impact. Tourists wandering into the square and looking confused, having wandered too far from the more commercial streets. By this time of night, all that changed. Now the small square was left to fend for itself. It seemed diminished, shadows pulling deep against the buildings, held back only by the solitary street lamp that rose up behind the wrought iron bench at its base. Except, Gerta leaned closer to the window pane. What was this? 2. Sophie's always telling me to pace myself. Trouble is, when I get absorbed in a piece, I could spend whole days in front of the canvas, barely stopping to eat or rest until the day's work is done. My best times, though, are early in the morning and late at night. Morning for the light, late hours for the silence. The phone doesn't ring, no one knocks on your door. I usually seem to finish a piece at night. I know I have to see it again in the morning light. So to stop myself from fiddling with it, I go out walking. Anywhere, really. When the work's gone well, I can feel a deep thrumming build up inside me. I wouldn't be able to sleep if I wanted to. Doesn't matter how tired I might be. What I need then is for the quiet streets of the city to swallow the dark night above them to pull me out of myself with my painting, to render calm to my quickening pulse. Walking puts a peace in my soul that I desperately need after having had my nose up close to a canvas for far too long. Any part of the city will do. Old Market's the best. I love it here, especially at this time of night. There's a stillness in the air. Even the houses and shops seem to be holding their breath. All I can hear is the sound of my boots on the cobblestones. One day I'm going to move into one of the old brick buildings that line these streets. Doesn't matter which one, I love them all. As much for where they are, I suppose, as for what they are. Because Old Market's a funny place. It's right downtown, but when you step into its narrow cobblestone streets, it's like you're stepping back in time to an older other place, The rhythms are different here. The sound of traffic seems to disappear far more quickly than should be physically possible. The air tastes cleaner. Still carries hints of baking bread, Indonesian spices, cabbage soups, fish, and sausages long after midnight. On a night like this, I don't even bother to change. I just go out in my paint-stained clothes, the scent of my turps and linseed trailing along behind me. I don't worry about how I look because there's no one to see me. By now all the cafes are closed up, except for the odd cat. Everyone's in bed or checking out the nightlife downtown, or almost everybody. I hear the sound of their wings first, loud in the stillness. Then I see them, a pair of large crows that swoop down out of the sky to dart down a street no wider than an alleyway just ahead of me. I didn't think crows were nocturnal. There's a confusing sort of animal. Then they're a confusing sort of animal at the best of times. Just consider all the superstitions associated with them. Good luck, bad luck. It's hard to work them all out. Some say that seeing a crow heralds a death. Some say a death brings crows so that they can ferry us on from this world to the next. Some say it just means there's a change coming. And then there's that old rhyme, 1 for sorrow, 2 for mirth. Gets so you don't know what to think when you see one. I do know it's definitely so odd to see them at this time of night. I cannot but follow in their wake. I don't even have to consider it. I just go. The quickened scuff of my boots not quite loud enough to envelop the sound of their wings. The crows lead me through the winding streets, past the closed shops and cafes, past the houses with their hidden gardens, occasional walkways overhead that join separate buildings, one to the other, to a deep and old market, following a steadily narrowing lane that finally opens out onto a small town square. I know this place. Christy used to come here and write sometimes. I don't think he's done it for a while. He's certainly not here tonight. The square is surrounded on 3 sides by tall brick buildings leaning against each other, cobblestones underfoot. There's an old-fashioned street light in the center of the square with a wrought iron bench underneath, facing the river. On the far side of the river, I could barely see Butler Common, the wooded hills beyond its lawns, and on tops of the hills, a constellation of twinkling house lights. By the bench is an overturned shopping cart with all sorts of junk spilling out of it. I can make out bundles of clothes, bottles and cans, plastic shopping bags filled with who knows what. What holds my gaze is the man lying beside the cart. I've seen him before, caging spare change, pushing that cart of his. He looks bigger than he probably is because of the layers of baggy clothes, though I remember him as being portly anyway. He's got a toque on his head, still has plenty of long, dirty blonde hair. His stubble is just the size of an actual beard, grayer than his hair. He's lying face up, staring at the sky. At first I think he's sleeping, then I think he's collapsed there. So when I see the ghost, I realize he's dead. The ghost is sitting on the edge of the cart, an unsubstantial version of the prone figure. This one is wearing a rough sort of armor instead of those layers of raggedy clothes. Below a leather breastplate, over a rough set of tunic, leggings, and leather boots. From his belt hangs an empty scabbard. Not big enough for a broadsword, but not small either. I start forward, only I've forgotten the crows. The flap of their descending wings draws my gaze up, and I can't hold on to the idea of the dead man and his ghost anymore, because somewhere between the moment of their final descent and landing, the pair change from crows into girls. They're not quite children. They don't have adult physiques either. I'm just over 5 feet, but they're shorter and even slighter of build. Their skin is the color of coffee with a dash of milk. Their hair an unruly lawn of blue-black spikes. The face is triangular in shape, with large green eyes and sharp features. I can't tell them apart. I decide they must be twins, even dressing the same in black combat boots, black leggings, black oversized raggedy sweaters that seem to be made of feathers. They look for all the world like a pair of crow girls, I hear myself say, in a voice that's barely a whisper. I lower myself down onto the cobblestone and sit with my back against the brick wall of the house behind me. This is a piece of magic. One of those moments when the lines between what is and what might be blur, like smudged charcoal, pentimento. You can still see the shapes of the preliminary sketch, but now there are all sorts of other things hovering and crowding at the edges of what you initially drew. I remember how I started thinking about superstitions when I first saw those two girls as crows. How there are so many odd tales and folk beliefs surrounding crows and other blackbirds, what seeing one or two or three might mean. I can't think of one that says anything about seeing them flying at night, or what to do when you stumble upon a pair of them that can take human form and hold a conversation with a dead man. One of the girls perches by the head of the corpse and begins to play with its hair, braiding it. The other sits cross-legged on the ground beside her twin and gives her attention to the ghost. "I was a knight once," the ghost says. "We remember," one of the girls tells him. "I'm going to be a knight again." The girl braiding the corpse's hair looks up at the ghost. "You might not have knights where you're going." "Do you know that?" "We don't know anything," the first girl says. She makes a steeple with her hands and looks at him above it. "We just are." "Tell us about the king's court again," her twin says. The ghost gives a slow nod of his head. "It was the greatest court in all the land." I close my eyes and lean my head back against the wall of the building I'm sitting against, the bricks pulling at the tangles of my hair. The ghost's voice holds me spellbound and takes me back in my mind's eye to an older time. It was such a tall building, the tallest in all the land, and the king's chamber was at the very top. When you looked out the window, all creation lay before you. I start out visualizing one of the office buildings downtown. The more I listen, the less my mind's eyes can hold the image. What starts out as a tall, modern office skyscraper slowly drifts apart into mist, reforms into a classic castle on top of a steep hill, with the town spread out along the slopes of its base. At first, I see it only from the outside. Then I begin to imagine a large room inside, and I fill it with details. I see a hooded hawk on a perch by one window. Tapestries hang from the walls. A king sits on his throne at the head of a large table, around which are numerous knights dressed in the same as the ghost. The ghost is there, too. He's younger, taller, his back is straighter. Hounds lounge on the floor. In Old Market, the dead man talks of tourneys and fairs, of border skirmishes and hunting for boar and pheasant in woods so old and deep we can't imagine their like any more. And as he speaks, I can see those tourneys and country fairs, the knights and their ladies, small groups of armed men skirmishing in a moorland, the ghost saying farewell to his lady and riding into a forest with his hawk on his arm, his hound trotting beside his horse. Still, I can't help but hear under the one story he tells, another story. One of cocktail parties and high-rise offices, stocks and mergers, of drops in the market and job losses, alcohol and divorce. He's managed to recast the tragedy of his life into a story from an old picture book. King Arthur, Prince Valiant, the man who lost his job, his wife, and his family, who ended up dying, homeless and alone on the streets where he lived, is an errant knight in the story he tells. I know this, but I can't see it. Like the crow girls, I'm swallowed by the fairy tale. The dead man tells now of that day's hunting in the forest near the castle. His horse is startled by an owl and rears back, throwing him into a steep crevice where he cracks his head on a stone outcrop. The hawk flies from his wrist as he falls, the laces of his hood catching on a branch and tugging off its hood. The hound comes down to investigate, licks his face, then lies down beside him. When night falls, the horse and hound emerge from the forest, alone. They approach the king's castle, the hawk flying overhead. And there the ghost tells us, while his own corpse lies at the bottom of the crevice, his lady stands with another man's arms around her shoulders. And then, the ghost says, the Corbies come for their dinner. And what baubles they could find. I open my eyes and blink, startled for a moment to find myself still in Old Market. The scene before me hasn't changed. One of the crow girls has cut off the corpse's braid. Now she's rummaging through the items spilled from the shopping cart. "That's us," the girl says. "We were the Corbies. Did we eat you?" What sort of baubles?" her companion wants to know. She holds up a Cracker Jack ring that she's found among the litter of the ghost's belongings. "You mean like this?" The ghost doesn't reply. He stands up, and the Crow girls scramble to their feet as well. "It's time for me to go," he says. "Can I have this?" the Crow girl holding the Cracker Jack ring asks. The other girl looks at the ring that's now on her twin's fingers. "Can I have one too?" The first girl hands her twin the braid of hair that she's cut from the corpse. After his first decisive statement, the ghost now stands there looking lost. "But I don't know where to go," he says. The Crow girls return their attention to him. "We can show you," the one holding the braid tells him. Her twin nods. "We've been there before." I watch them as they each take one of his hands and walk with him toward the river. When they reach the low wall, the girls become crows again, flying on either side of the dead man's ghostly figure as he steps through the wall and continues to walk up into the sky. For one long moment, the impossible image holds. Then they all disappear. Ghost, Crow girls, all. I sat there for a while longer before I finally managed to stand up and walk over to the shopping cart. I bend down and touch the corpse's throat, 2 fingers against the carotid artery, searching for a pulse. There isn't any. I look around and see a face peering down at me from a second-floor window. It's an old woman, and I realize I saw her earlier. She's been there all along. I walk toward her house and knock on the door. It seems to take forever for anyone to answer, but finally a light comes on in the hall and the door opens. The old woman I saw upstairs is standing there looking at me. "Do you have a phone?" I ask. "I need to call 911. 3. What a night it had been, Gerta thought. She stood on her front steps with a rather self-contained young woman who'd introduced herself as Jilly, not quite certain what to do, what was expected at a time such as this. At least the police had finally gone away, taking that poor homeless man's body with them. They had left behind his shopping cart and a scatter of belongings that had been strewn about it. "I saw you watching from the window," Jilly said. "You saw it all, but you didn't say anything about the Crow girls." Gerta smiled. "Crow girls, I like that. It suits them. Why didn't you say anything?" "I didn't think they'd believe me." She paused for a moment, then added, "Why don't you come in and have a cup of tea?" "I'd like that." Gerta knew that her kitchen was clean, but terribly old-fashioned. She didn't know what her guest would think of it. The wooden kitchen table and chairs were the same ones she and Jan had bought when they first moved in. More years passed than she cared to remember. A drip had put a rusty stain on the porcelain of her sink that simply couldn't be cleaned. The stove and fridge were both circa 1950, bulky with rounded corners. There was a long wooden counter along one wall with lots of cupboards and shelves above and below it, all loaded with various kitchen accoutrements and knickknacks. The window over the sink was hung with lacy curtains, the sill a jungle of potted plants. But Jilly seemed delighted by her surroundings. While Gerta started the makings for tea, putting the kettle on the stove, teacups on the table, she got milk from the fridge and brought the sugar bowl to the table. "Do you know him?" Gerta asked. She took a brown Betty teapot down from the shelf. It was rarely used anymore. With so few visitors, she usually made her tea in the cup now. "The man who died," she added. "Not personally. I've seen him around, on the streets. I think his name was Hamish. That's what people called him." "The poor man," Julie nodded. "It's funny. You forget that everyone's got their own movie running through their heads. He pretty much hit rock bottom here, in the world we all share. But the whole time, in his own mind, he was living the life of a questing knight. Who's to say which was more real?" When the water began to boil, Gerta poured some into the pot to warm it up. Emptying the pot into the sink, she dropped in a pair of tea bags and filled the pot, bringing it to the table to steep. She sat down across from her guest, smoothing down her skirt. The cats finally came in to have a look at the company. Swore to Meg first, slipping under the table and up onto Gerta's lap. The other two watched from the doorway. "Did we really see what I think we saw?" Gerta asked after a moment's hesitation. Julie smiled. "Crow girls and a ghost?" "Yes. Were they real, or did we imagine them?" "I'm not sure it's important to ask if they were real or not." "Why ever not?" Gerta said. "It'd be such a comfort to know for certain that some part of us goes on. To know there was a chance one could be joined once more with those who had gone on before, but she left that unsaid. Julie leaned her elbow on the table, chin in her hands, and looked toward the window. It was obviously seeing beyond the plants and the view on the far side of the glass panes, her gaze drawn to something that lay in an unseen distance. "I think we already know that," she finally said. "I suppose." Julie returned her attention to Gerta. "You know," she said, "I've seen those crow girls before, too. Just as girls, not as crows. But I keep forgetting about them, the way the world forgets about people like Hamish." She sat up straighter. "Think how dull we believe the world would be without them to remind us." Gerta waited a moment, watching her guest's gaze take on that dreamy, distant look once more. "Remind us of what?" she asked after a moment. Julie smiled again. "That anything is possible." Gerta thought about that. Her own gaze went to the window. Outside, she caught a glimpse of 2 crows flying across the city skyline. She stroked Sword of Meg's soft black fur and gave a slow nod. After what she'd seen tonight, she could believe it, that anything was possible. She remembered her husband, Jan, not as he'd been in those last years before the illness had taken him, but before that, when they were still young, when they had just married and all the world and life lay ahead of them. That was how she wanted it to be when she finally joined him again. If anything was possible, and that was how she would have it be.